In 2025, the stock market can look almost heroic, while real people are being erased in real time. 9 months, nearly 1 million jobs gone. And the cruel part is not that this happened. The cruel part is how quietly everyone pretended it was impossible, even as the signs were everywhere. You feel it in your own life, even if you've never been fired. The feeling that the ground under your career is thinner than you were told. The sensation that good performance no longer protects you, because the rules keep changing underneath. This video is about the hidden engine behind that feeling, and the hidden truth people don't want to admit. Your life is not being run by your effort. It is being run by incentives, technology, and systems that will gladly sacrifice you. Let's talk about the largest corporate surgery in modern American economic history and why it's happening in the age of algorithms. Not the comforting fairy tale where AI replaces only boring tasks, not the clean story where everyone adapts peacefully. Instead, we'll go straight into the mechanism, how easy money trained companies to overhire, how interest rates forced a reckoning, and how generative AI turned that reckoning into something faster, colder, and more profitable for whoever owns the tools. And then we'll ask the question that actually matters for you, not for headlines. Where do you stand in this new order? What kind of person gets protected, and what kind of person becomes disposable? Because this is not only an economic story, it is a psychological story. It's about what you believe, what you fear, and what you keep avoiding when the evidence says you should stop lying to yourself. The first uncomfortable truth is this: 2025 layoffs were not a random storm. They were a planned reallocation of money. And you can see it in the numbers, but the real lesson is in the logic. When capital becomes expensive, companies don't just cut costs, they cut identities. During the years after 2020, the world trained itself to believe in growth as if it were a moral virtue. Money was cheap, so everyone acted like the future was an automatic gift. The corporate version of hope was hiring. Companies opened doors, inflated teams, and treated headcount like proof of intelligence. If you had a large org chart, you looked like you were winning. If you didn't, investors assumed you were falling behind. So many organizations hired hundreds of thousands of people not because they had a concrete need that would generate profit, but because they needed size, they needed momentum, they needed the story to stay alive. User growth, market expansion, domination of mindshare. In that environment, competence became flexible. You could be average and still survive, because the goal wasn't efficiency. The goal was scaling. And when you scale without efficiency, you build a body full of fat. You hire departments that coordinate with other departments. You create layers that exist to justify previous layers. You fill calendars with meetings that exist to manage uncertainty. Then reality showed up like a knife. When interest rates rose, the cost of capital increased. Suddenly, the money that once moved through companies effortlessly began to behave like a scarce resource. Every expense got scrutinized. Every budget needed a reason. The market stopped rewarding maybe later. It demanded evidence now. So you saw layoffs that felt brutal, not only because the people suffered, but because the decision makers acted like they were removing weight from a failing machine. They weren't just shrinking teams, they were redesigning their relationship with risk. They were telling investors, in numbers, that they could survive without constant external support. Let's make this concrete with the kind of psychological fog most people live in. Imagine you're a worker who believes your role is essential. You see your tasks, your deliverables, your skills. You can point to things you've improved. You might even be proud. And then one day, you get a message that says the company is restructuring. Restructuring sounds neutral. It sounds like a corporate weather pattern. It hides the deeper truth. Your role was not evaluated as a human contribution. It was evaluated as a financial variable. Your salary was a cost line. Your output was only as valuable as it was compared to alternatives. And when alternatives got cheaper or faster, you became the easiest lever to pull. This is why layoffs feel like betrayal even when the economy is changing. The betrayal is not only losing a job, the betrayal is realizing that your internal narrative about your worth was never the thing driving decisions. It was never the system's priority. The system's priority was profitability and survival under new incentives. Now comes the second truth, and it's the one that makes people angry in a way they can't fully explain. 2025 wasn't only the usual economic cycle, it was powered by a unique variable that changes the speed limit of the entire market: generative AI. AI didn't just increase productivity, it changed what productivity even means. It changed what counts as labor. It changed what counts as cost. Here's the uncomfortable paradox. We were told AI would assist people, but what happened in practice is that AI competed for the same resources people used to rely on: payroll budgets. Every company has two buckets in its mind, even if they never say it out loud. There's capital expenditure, The money spent on tools, infrastructure, chips, data centers, systems, and there's operating expenditure, the ongoing costs like salaries and benefits. Workers live inside operating expenditure. AI lives heavily inside capital expenditure at first. You invest to buy chips. You invest to build training pipelines. You invest to power data centers that can consume electricity like a small city. And then, when AI starts producing outputs, you discover something darker. You can run with fewer humans. So the finance story becomes a trade. We invest more in technology and we reduce the human cost. That is not a moral statement. It is a spreadsheet statement. AI turns labor into a replaceable component. When executives speak carefully on earnings calls, they talk about restructuring, rebalancing, optimizing workflows. But beneath the language is a blunt mechanical fact. AI can do many tasks that once required large teams. And when the tasks are similar enough, AI doesn't just replace workers. It replaces the justification for hiring more workers. You can feel this if you've tried to get work done in recent years. The roles that used to need 10 people start to look like they only need 2. The process becomes faster, and the system doesn't want to pay for the old version of the process. This is where the 130 million kind of pressure appears. In the AI world, the investment is enormous. The company doesn't have years to prove results. Investors want immediate proof that the new machine will reduce costs. And the fastest way to show cost reduction is to cut headcount. Not because a product was launched last quarter, not because a new revenue stream appeared overnight, but because the company can reduce payroll immediately and report improvements quickly. So the decision becomes obvious in the cold logic of incentives. If an AI system costs less than the salary and overhead of the team it replaces, the board will choose the AI system. You can argue about ethics, you can argue about human dignity, but the board will choose the spreadsheet. Imagine a company that has a customer service team, maybe 500 people. Maybe their total wages, benefits, and overhead sum to $25 million over a year. And then imagine a new AI system that costs a fraction of that. Not perfectly, not magically, but good enough to handle the repetitive cases. Now imagine that investors want proof in the next reporting cycle. The humans can't wait for your hope. They can't wait for eventually we'll reskill everyone. The algorithm doesn't care about your feelings. The company cares about the cost difference today. This is the hidden truth people don't admit. AI layoffs are not only about business performance, they are about the economics of demonstration. Executives are rewarded for visible changes, not for long-term compassion. At Intel, some of the layoffs were explained by chip competition and manufacturing needs. At others, AI optimization replaced office roles. The exact reasons change by company, but the pattern stays. Money flows toward technology, and payroll gets trimmed to fund that flow. If you understand that, you can stop being confused about why white-collar jobs, not only factory jobs, are vanishing. Now we reach the third truth, and it's the one that hits identity. For decades, the public narrative was that automation threatens the factory worker, the blue-collar labor. That's the story people could tolerate. It felt like a distant problem. It preserved the idea that office jobs were safe because they were smart. But generative AI doesn't just automate physical work. It attacks cognitive tasks that used to require training and experience. Basic coding, document creation, copywriting, routine analysis, translation, initial HR screening, standard reporting. This is where the middle layer breaks. The middle layer is what most people are, not the top executive with options and power, not the minimum wage worker in the most obvious job category. The middle is the large group of educated professionals whose confidence is built on the assumption that their skills are hard to copy. Generative AI copies those skills extremely fast, and it does it with a cost close to zero compared to wages. The result is a new kind of unemployment that doesn't look like the old unemployment. It doesn't feel like a temporary gap between jobs. It feels like a permanent downgrade of the market value of your abilities. Here's a micro story that many people will recognize. Picture a person who spent years learning a particular craft. Maybe they're a junior software developer, or a content writer, or a data analyst who cleans and formats data. They're not the architect of systems, they're the operator. They take requests, they implement tasks. Then AI arrives that can draft code snippets, generate summaries, propose solutions, and create reports. It might not be perfect, but it becomes competent at the parts of the job that used to occupy most of the time. Suddenly, the company can hire fewer people for the same output. What happens psychologically is devastating. The person doesn't just lose income, they lose certainty. They start questioning whether their identity was ever real value. And that questioning becomes unbearable, so they try to escape it by pretending it's temporary, or they try to escape it by blaming themselves for not being good enough, or they blame the company for being greedy. All of those are attempts to avoid the larger truth. The market changed, and it changed faster than your identity adapted. This is also why the layoffs become a generational fracture. Once middle-skilled jobs start collapsing, the stability people were promised stops existing. The ladder becomes a wall. You don't climb it, you hit it. When nearly 1 million workers are removed quickly, the psychological impact spreads beyond those individuals. A society runs on consumer confidence. If people fear they could be next, they stop buying, they save money, they delay major purchases. That might sound like personal responsibility, but it's really social contagion of anxiety. In the United States, consumer spending drives the engine. If job loss spreads, people reduce discretionary spending first. They don't buy the new car. They don't upgrade the apartment. They postpone vacations. They stop treating the future like something they can count on. Then businesses feel it. Retail and services sense reduced demand. They see inventory piling up. They cut prices. Their margins shrink. And when margins shrink, layoffs follow. So you get a downward spiral. Unemployment reduces consumption. Reduced consumption reduces revenue. Reduced revenue triggers more layoffs. And fear increases further. Now consider the additional twist of AI energy costs and supply disruptions. Prices don't always drop the way people assume they will. Some essential costs can stay sticky or rise. So the economy can end up with slow growth, high unemployment, and stubborn prices in some sectors. That's the nightmare mix people don't have a word for clearly enough. It's the kind of environment where the future feels expensive and the job market feels hostile. Then politics gets dragged into it like a desperate puppet. Leaders can celebrate markets while workers bleed. Tariffs can protect some local industries, but they can't stop AI-driven automation from undercutting labor needs. In fact, protection sometimes increases incentives to innovate faster because companies want to preserve margins under higher input costs. When you squeeze one side, you often accelerate the other. The squeeze becomes fuel for automation. Here is the social problem that no politician can solve with speeches. Government wants employment. The market wants efficiency. When those goals conflict at scale, society experiences instability. People who own the technology get richer. People who sell their time get squeezed. The middle class becomes less stable, wealth concentrates, and the resentment doesn't stay polite. This is how you end up with a widening gap between those who control algorithms and those who are controlled by them. Now, the fourth truth: this doesn't stay in America. When American firms cut costs, they ripple outward. Outsourcing changes, global employment changes, demand changes. Even if the layoffs happen in one country, the consequences export along supply chains and business strategies. Europe feels it because its energy costs and regulatory constraints can reduce competitiveness. When they lose market share, they restructure too. When they restructure, they cut jobs. When they cut jobs, they reduce consumer confidence. That pattern travels. Multinationals also redesign their operations. They still need delivery, support, back office, data labeling, quality control, moderation, and logistics. They just want it cheaper. And when they optimize for cost, they don't have sentimental constraints. They move the work where the labor cost is lower and where the skills are good enough. But here's where it gets psychologically tricky for developing countries like Vietnam, because there is real opportunity in this wave. The trick is that opportunity can seduce you into complacency. Vietnam can attract parts of the value chain. If companies keep AI investment growing and they keep reducing high-cost labor at home, they will distribute tasks across borders. Back office operations, delivery centers, data operations, software testing support, customer service, and content moderation can expand. That can sound like a blessing, and in the near term it can be. More contracts mean more jobs. More roles mean more income for families. And if you're young and ambitious, you might see this as your opening. But the hidden truth is that this opening is not a permanent shelter. It's a transitional relocation. It can be replaced by the next wave of automation. And the next wave is not theoretical anymore. It's already happening. If a job is mostly repetitive, document-based, or rules-based, AI eventually becomes cheaper than the labor that performs it. When that happens, the work leaves again. It doesn't require animosity. It only requires cost optimization. So Vietnam cannot afford the comforting fantasy that we will just outsource and grow forever. That is how countries lose decades. They rely on price competition, not value creation. They become dependent on external demand and vulnerable to every efficiency cycle abroad. This leads to a fifth truth, the most practical and the most unforgiving. If your labor value is your cheap price, you are playing a losing game against technology. AI improves and gets integrated faster than wage dynamics move. A country that only sells affordability will eventually be undercut by AI that can do the work without wages. That doesn't mean people will do nothing. It means the market value of their current roles collapses again, just like the market value of roles collapsed in the United States. So what should be done? Not speeches, strategy. The real exit from this trap is shifting from cheap labor to core capability, not learning to use tools superficially, but building the ability to work with underlying systems, how models are trained, how data pipelines are governed.